He was the heir to a billion-dollar empire, living in a mansion with 27 rooms. But he hadn't spoken a single word in 7 years. Doctors had given up. Therapists had failed. His father had lost hope. Everyone believed the boy was broken beyond repair. But there was one person who refused to accept that verdict. A housekeeper who barely spoke English. A woman with no education, no credentials, no reason to believe she could succeed where experts had failed. What she did next would not only change that boy's life forever, but would shake the foundations of one of the most powerful families in America. This is a story about silence, compassion, and the extraordinary power of believing in someone when the entire world has stopped. Prepare yourself, because this journey will challenge everything you think you know about healing, connection, and what it truly means to save a life. Thomas Whitmore III was born into privilege that most people couldn't even imagine. His father, Thomas Whitmore Jr., had built a technology empire worth $3 billion. The Whitmore estate sprawled across 40 acres in Connecticut, with gardens designed by award-winning architects, an Olympic-sized pool, and a private tennis court. Thomas III, or Tommy as his mother called him, was supposed to inherit all of it. He was a bright child, curious and energetic. At age 4, he could read at a second-grade level. At 5, he was taking piano lessons and showed remarkable talent. His parents hired the best tutors, enrolled him in exclusive programs, surrounded him with opportunities that most children would never have. But then, on a cold November evening when Tommy was 6 years old, everything shattered. His mother, Elizabeth, was driving home from a charity gala. The roads were icy. A truck ran a red light. The impact was instantaneous. Elizabeth died at the scene. Tommy was in the back seat. He survived with minor physical injuries, just a broken arm and some bruises. But something inside him broke that night in a way that no doctor could see on an X-ray. In the days after the accident, Tommy stopped speaking. Not gradually, not slowly. He simply stopped. His father, drowning in his own grief, barely noticed at first. He assumed it was shock, that time would heal the wound. But weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. Tommy remained silent. Thomas Jr. threw money at the problem. He hired child psychiatrists from Harvard, trauma specialists from Switzerland, speech therapists with decades of experience. They tried everything: play therapy, art therapy, music therapy, medication, hypnosis, alternative treatments. Nothing worked. Tommy would sit in their offices, staring at nothing, his eyes distant and empty. He was physically present but emotionally unreachable, locked inside a prison that no one could penetrate. By the time Tommy turned 10, his father had essentially given up. Thomas Jr. buried himself in work, spending 18 hours a day at the office, avoiding the painful reminder of his failure as a father. Tommy was left in the care of a rotating staff of nannies and tutors who treated him like a fragile object, not a human being. They fed him, dressed him, made sure he completed his schoolwork. But there was no warmth, no connection, no life. Tommy moved through his days like a ghost, silent and alone in a mansion filled with expensive things, but devoid of love. The house staff whispered about him. Some felt pity, others felt uncomfortable. A few were frightened by his silence, as if it were contagious. They would leave food outside his door rather than interact with him. They would communicate through notes rather than speak to him directly. The boy had become invisible in his own home, a shadow drifting through hallways that echoed with emptiness. Tommy's bedroom was on the 3rd floor, overlooking the gardens. It was enormous, filled with toys he never played with, books he never read, a television he never watched. He would spend hours sitting by the window, staring out at nothing in particular. Sometimes he would draw, simple sketches of trees and clouds and birds, but he never showed them to anyone. He kept them hidden in a drawer, as if even his art was too vulnerable to share. His father would occasionally check on him, standing in the doorway with the expression of helpless frustration. He didn't know what to say to his son anymore. Every conversation was one-sided, every attempt at connection met with silence. Eventually, Thomas Jr. stopped trying. It was easier to avoid the pain than to face it every day. The emotional distance between them grew into a chasm that seemed impossible to cross. Tommy attended a private school, but he was isolated there too. The other children had learned to ignore him. The teachers treated him with cautious patience, expecting nothing, receiving nothing. He would sit in the back of the classroom, completing his assignments mechanically, never raising his hand, never participating, never connecting. At lunch, he sat alone. During recess, he stood against the wall, watching the other children play games he would never join. He had become a stranger in his own life, disconnected from everyone and everything around him. One particularly painful incident occurred during a school presentation. Each student was supposed to give a 5-minute talk about their family. When Tommy's turn came, he walked to the front of the class and stood there in absolute silence for the entire 5 minutes. The teacher didn't know what to do. The students giggled uncomfortably. Finally, the teacher gently told Tommy he could sit down. He returned to his seat without any expression, without any acknowledgement of what had just happened. That night, his father received a call from the school counselor suggesting that perhaps Tommy would be better served by homeschooling. It was a polite way of saying the boy was too disruptive to keep in a regular classroom. Thomas Jr. agreed immediately, relieved to have one less reminder of his failure. Then, on a rainy Tuesday in September, everything began to change. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, had quit abruptly, fed up with the cold atmosphere and Mr. Whitmore's impossible demands. The agency sent a replacement the next day. Her name was Maria Santos. She was 43 years old, a recent immigrant from Guatemala with limited English and no experience working in wealthy households. She had been a school teacher in her home country, but in America, cleaning houses was the only work she could find. Maria arrived at the Whitmore estate with a single suitcase and enormous determination. She needed this job desperately. She had 2 daughters back in Guatemala that she was supporting, sending every penny she could save. She couldn't afford to fail. Mrs. Patterson's assistant gave Maria a brief tour of the mansion, rattling off instructions about which rooms to clean on which days, which areas were off limits, how Mr. Whitmore liked his coffee. Then, almost as an afterthought, she mentioned the boy. Tommy. 3rd floor. Don't bother him. He doesn't talk. Just leave his meals outside the door. Maria nodded, taking mental notes, trying to absorb the overwhelming amount of information. That evening, as she prepared dinner in the massive kitchen, she heard footsteps above her. Soft, hesitant footsteps. She looked up at the ceiling, thinking about the silent boy on the 3rd floor. Her heart ached. She thought of her own daughters, wondering what it would feel like to have a child who couldn't or wouldn't speak. The next morning, Maria carried Tommy's breakfast tray to the 3rd floor. The assistant had told her to leave it outside the door, but something made her hesitate. She knocked gently. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. Slowly she opened the door. Tommy was sitting by the window exactly as he had been the night before, staring out at the rain-soaked gardens. He didn't turn around. He didn't acknowledge her presence. Maria could have left the tray and walked away. That's what everyone else did. But instead she stepped into the room. "Good morning," she said softly in her accented English. "I bring you breakfast." Tommy remained motionless. Maria set the tray on his desk and looked around the room. It was pristine, almost sterile. No clutter, no personality, no signs of a child actually living there. She noticed a small drawing on the desk, partially hidden under a book. Carefully, she picked it up. It was a sketch of a bird in flight, surprisingly detailed and beautiful. "This is very beautiful," Maria said, genuine admiration in her voice. "You draw this?" Tommy's shoulders tensed slightly. It was the first reaction Maria had seen. She replaced the drawing exactly where she had found it. "You are a very talented artist," she continued, her voice warm and gentle. "In my country, I was teacher. I teach children like you. Smart children. Creative children." She moved toward the window, standing a few feet away from Tommy, looking out at the same view he was seeing. "Is beautiful garden, no? In Guatemala, we have gardens too. Different flowers, but same beauty." Tommy didn't respond, but Maria noticed something subtle. His breathing had changed. He was listening. She didn't push. She simply stood there for a moment, sharing the silence with him, not as something uncomfortable that needed to be filled, but as something natural, even peaceful. Then she smiled and said, "I leave you now. But I come back later, okay? You eat breakfast. It's getting cold." She left the room quietly, closing the door behind her. It seemed like such a small moment, meaningless even. But for the first time in years, someone had entered Tommy's space and treated him like a person, not a problem to be solved or a tragedy to be pitied. Over the following days, Maria continued her routine. Every morning she brought Tommy's breakfast and spent a few minutes in his room. She never demanded conversation. She never asked why he didn't speak. She simply talked to him naturally, telling him about her day, sharing stories about her daughters in Guatemala, describing the flowers in the garden, commenting on the weather. Sometimes she would sit in the chair across from him and work on her English, reading from a children's book she had borrowed from the library, pronouncing the words carefully, asking Tommy if she was saying them correctly. Of course, he never answered, but she pretended he did. "Thank you," she would say with a smile, as if he had confirmed her pronunciation. "You are a good teacher." The other staff members thought she was wasting her time. Mr. Whitmore barely noticed. He was too consumed with a major business deal to pay attention to the new housekeeper. But Maria persisted, driven by an instinct she couldn't quite explain. There was something about Tommy that reminded her of a student she once had in Guatemala, a girl who had stopped speaking after witnessing violence in her village. Maria had worked with that girl for months, patiently, consistently, without pressure. Eventually, the girl had started speaking again. Not because of any therapeutic technique or professional intervention, but because someone had simply been present with her, had seen her humanity when others saw only her trauma. One morning, about 2 weeks after Maria had started, she brought Tommy's breakfast as usual. But this time, she also brought something else. From her apron pocket, she pulled out a small sketchbook and a set of colored pencils. "I find these in store," she said, placing them on his desk beside the breakfast tray. "I think maybe you like them. For your beautiful drawings." Tommy glanced at the sketchbook, then back at the window. Maria didn't wait for a response. She began tidying his room, humming softly as she worked. It was a melody from her childhood, a lullaby her mother used to sing. She wasn't even aware she was doing it. As she was arranging some books on his shelf, she heard a sound. Soft, almost inaudible. She turned around. Tommy had opened the sketchbook and was running his fingers over the blank pages. His expression hadn't changed, but there was something different in his posture. A subtle shift that suggested curiosity, maybe even interest. Maria smiled but said nothing. She finished her work and left quietly. That afternoon, when she returned to collect the lunch tray, she noticed that one page of the sketchbook had been used. Tommy had drawn a tree. It was more detailed than his previous drawings, with careful attention to the texture of the bark and the way the branches spread toward the sky. Maria's heart swelled. She didn't comment on the drawing directly, knowing that too much attention might scare him away. Instead, she simply said, "The trees here are beautiful. In Guatemala, we have different trees. Very tall, with big leaves. Maybe someday I show you pictures." The next day, Tommy had drawn 2 trees. The day after that, 3. Within a week, he had filled half the sketchbook. Each drawing was more elaborate than the last, showing a talent that had been hidden away for years. Maria began bringing her phone to work, showing Tommy pictures of Guatemala during their morning conversations. She showed him photos of her village, the mountains, the colorful markets, the children playing in the streets. "Look," she would say. "This is my daughter, Rosa. She is same age like you. She loved to draw too." Tommy studied the photos carefully, and for the first time Maria saw something that looked almost like interest in his eyes. But not everyone was pleased with Maria's approach. Mr. Whitmore's personal assistant, Catherine, had been with the family for 15 years. She was efficient, professional, and deeply protective of the household's routines. She had watched a parade of caregivers try and fail to reach Tommy, and she viewed Maria's efforts as naive at best, potentially harmful at worst. One morning, Catherine intercepted Maria in the hallway. "Mrs. Santos, I need to speak with you," she said, her voice cold and formal. "You've been spending considerable time in Master Thomas's room. That's not part of your duties." "I am just bringing breakfast," Maria replied, confused. "And talking to him." "Yes, I've noticed." Catherine's expression hardened. "The boy doesn't speak, Mrs. Santos. He hasn't spoken in 7 years. Doctors, therapists, specialists, all of them have tried. What makes you think casual conversation is going to accomplish anything?" Maria met her gaze steadily. "Maybe he need friend, not doctor." "That's not your place," Catherine snapped. "Your job is to clean and prepare meals. Mr. Whitmore has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on professional help for his son. I won't have you undoing their work with misguided kindness." "But I am not undoing anything," Maria protested. "I am just being nice to lonely boy." Catherine stepped closer, her voice lowering to a threatening whisper. "Let me be very clear. If you continue to overstep your boundaries, I will have no choice but to report this to Mr. Whitmore. And I can assure you, he will not appreciate a housekeeper with no qualifications interfering with his son's care. Do you understand?" Maria felt her face grow hot. She thought about her daughters, about the money she needed to send home, about how desperately she needed this job. But she also thought about Tommy, sitting alone in that enormous room, surrounded by silence and abandonment. She took a deep breath. "I understand," she said quietly, "but I also understand what it's like to be far from people who love you. To be alone. That boy? He is alone in house full of people. That is worse than being poor. That is being invisible. Catherine's expression didn't soften. You have been warned, Mrs. Santos. Consider this your only warning. That evening, Maria sat in her small room in the staff quarters, torn between self-preservation and conscience. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Her daughters depended on her. But she also couldn't ignore the connection she felt she was building with Tommy, fragile as it was. She decided to continue, but more carefully, making sure her regular duties were completed perfectly so Catherine would have no other reason to complain. The next morning she brought Tommy's breakfast as usual, but she kept her visit brief, just a few words of greeting before leaving. She noticed the disappointment in the way Tommy's shoulders slumped slightly, and it broke her heart. That afternoon, as she was cleaning the second-floor library, she heard raised voices from Mr. Whitmore's study. The door was slightly ajar. She shouldn't have listened, but she couldn't help overhearing. It was Mr. Whitmore talking to someone on the phone. He sounded frustrated, almost desperate. I don't care what it costs, he was saying. I need this deal to close. The company is leveraged to the limit. If this falls through, we're looking at bankruptcy. Maria's eyes widened. Bankruptcy? The billionaire family was in financial trouble? She quickly moved away from the door, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping. But the revelation changed her perspective. This family wasn't just emotionally broken. They were financially crumbling too. The pressure on Mr. Whitmore must have been enormous. No wonder he had no energy left for his son. Over the next few weeks, Maria continued her careful dance, fulfilling her duties perfectly while still making time for brief interactions with Tommy. She noticed that he had started positioning himself so he could see her when she entered the room. He would watch her movements, tracking her with his eyes even though he never spoke. One day she brought him a small potted plant for his window. Is succulent, she explained. Very easy to take care of. You give little water, once a week. It grows slow, but is strong. Like you. Tommy stared at the plant for a long moment. Then, in a gesture so subtle she almost missed it, he reached out and touched one of the leaves gently. Maria felt tears prick her eyes but forced them back. Progress was happening. She was certain of it. But it was measured in millimeters, not miles. Then came the incident that nearly ended everything. Mr. Whitmore had a major client visiting the estate for dinner, a crucial meeting that could save his failing business. Catherine had the entire staff working overtime to make sure everything was perfect. Maria was assigned to serve the meal. She was nervous, her limited English making her anxious about interacting with sophisticated guests, but she performed her duties carefully, serving each course without incident. After dinner, as the men retired to the study for cognac and business discussion, Maria was clearing the dining room. Through the wall she could hear their conversation. Mr. Whitmore was making his pitch, his voice confident despite the desperation Maria knew he felt. The client seemed interested but non-committal. Then, disaster struck. As Maria was carrying a tray of crystal glasses to the kitchen, she turned a corner and collided with Catherine, who was rushing in the opposite direction. The tray flew from Maria's hands. 12 antique crystal glasses, family heirlooms worth thousands of dollars, shattered on the marble floor. The crash echoed through the mansion like an explosion. The conversation in the study stopped abruptly. Mr. Whitmore appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment in front of his important guest. "What the hell is going on out here?" he demanded. Maria stood frozen, surrounded by shattered crystal, her heart pounding. "I am so sorry, Mr. Whitmore," she stammered. "I am so sorry. I did not see Catherine." Catherine, ever the opportunist, immediately spoke up. "Sir, I've been meaning to discuss Mrs. Santos with you. She's been overstepping her boundaries, spending inappropriate amounts of time with Master Thomas, neglecting her primary duties. And now this. I really think we need to reconsider her employment." Mr. Whitmore looked at Maria as if seeing her for the first time. "You're the new housekeeper?" Maria nodded, unable to speak, tears threatening to spill. Mr. Whitmore rubbed his face wearily. He glanced back at his guest, who was watching the scene with uncomfortable curiosity. "We'll discuss this later," he said tersely. "Clean this up immediately." He returned to the study, but Maria could hear the client making excuses about an early morning meeting, clearly eager to leave the awkward situation. The deal, her clumsiness might have just cost the Whitmores everything. Catherine glared at Maria with cold satisfaction. "Pack your things," she said quietly. "You'll be gone by morning." Maria knelt among the broken crystal, tears finally falling. She had tried so hard. She had needed this job so desperately. And in one careless moment, it was over. But then she heard something that made her freeze. Footsteps on the stairs. Light, hesitant footsteps. She looked up. Tommy was standing at the bottom of the staircase, still in his pajamas. He had never come downstairs during the day before, never left his room voluntarily. He stood there, staring at Maria kneeling among the broken glass, tears on her face. And then something extraordinary happened. Tommy walked toward her, not quickly but deliberately. Catherine started to intervene. "Master Thomas, you shouldn't be down here," but he ignored her. He walked right up to Maria, standing just inches away, looking down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. And then, for the first time in 7 years, Thomas Whitmore III opened his mouth and spoke. His voice was rough, unpracticed, barely more than a whisper. But the words were clear. "Don't cry." The entire mansion seemed to hold its breath. Catherine stood frozen, her mouth open in shock. From the study, Mr. Whitmore's voice called out, "What's going on out there now?" But no one answered. Tommy reached down and took Maria's hand, his small fingers wrapping around hers. "Not her fault," he said, his voice growing slightly stronger with each word. "I came down. I pushed Trey. Accident. My fault." Maria stared at him, tears streaming down her face now for entirely different reasons. Tommy was lying to protect her. After 7 years of silence, his first words were a lie told out of compassion. Catherine found her voice. "Master Thomas, that's not—" Mr. Whitmore appeared in the doorway again, irritated by the continued disruption. But when he saw his son standing there, speaking, holding the housekeeper's hand, he froze completely. "Tommy?" he whispered, as if afraid that speaking too loudly would break the spell. Tommy turned to face his father. "Hi, Dad," he said simply. Mr. Whitmore's legs seemed to give way. He grabbed the doorframe for support, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, and overwhelming emotion. The client had followed him out, witnessing the scene with wide eyes. "You, Tommy, you're—" Mr. Whitmore couldn't even form a complete sentence. 7 years of grief, guilt, and helpless frustration were crashing over him all at once. Tommy looked back at Maria, then at his father again. "Maria is my friend," he said. "She didn't break glasses. I did. Don't fire her, please." Mr. Whitmore moved toward his son as if in a dream, dropping to his knees so he was at eye level with Tommy. He reached out tentatively, afraid to touch him, afraid this was somehow a hallucination. "I don't care about the glasses," he said, his voice breaking. "Tommy, you're talking. You're actually talking." For a moment, father and son just stared at each other, years of distance and pain hanging between them. Then Tommy said something that shattered what remained of Mr. Whitmore's composure. "I'm sorry I stopped, Dad. I just couldn't remember how." Mr. Whitmore pulled his son into his arms and wept openly, no longer caring about his guest, his business deal, his carefully maintained image of control. He held his son and cried like he hadn't cried since the night his wife died. Tommy stood stiffly in his father's embrace, not quite sure how to respond after so many years of emotional isolation. But he didn't pull away. Catherine stood to the side, her plans for Maria's dismissal evaporating. The client quietly excused himself, clearly moved by what he had witnessed. Maria remained kneeling among the broken glass, watching the reunion with a full heart. After what felt like an eternity, Mr. Whitmore pulled back, wiping his eyes unselfconsciously. "What happened?" he asked Tommy. Why did you?" Tommy looked at Maria. "She talked to me," he said simply. "Every day. She didn't want anything. Didn't try to fix me. Just talked. Like I was normal." Mr. Whitmore turned to Maria, seeing her clearly for the first time. Not as a servant, but as the person who had accomplished what thousands of dollars and countless experts could not. "Stand up, please," he said gently. Maria rose, brushing off her uniform. "I am so sorry about glasses, Mr. Whitmore," she began, but he held up his hand to stop her. "How long have you been working here?" 3 weeks, sir," Maria answered quietly. 3 weeks, Mr. Whitmore repeated, shaking his head in wonder. "In 3 weeks, you did what specialists couldn't do in 7 years." "I don't," Maria started, but Tommy interrupted. "She wasn't trying to fix me," he said. "She was just nice. She showed me pictures of her family, told me stories, brought me paper to draw. She didn't make me talk. She just made me want to." Mr. Whitmore looked at his son with amazement and profound regret. "I hired all those therapists, spent all that money, and what you needed was someone to just be kind to you." Tommy shrugged, a gesture so normal, so childlike, that Mr. Whitmore felt his eyes filling with tears again. I guess I needed a friend, Tommy said. Mr. Whitmore stood up, facing Maria directly. Mrs. Santos, I don't know how to thank you. I owe you more than I could possibly repay. Maria shook her head. You owe me nothing, sir. I just see lonely boy. I have daughters. I understand. Catherine, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. Sir, about the broken crystal. Mr. Whitmore cut her off with an impatient gesture. I don't give a damn about the crystal, Catherine. My son is speaking. Do you understand? After 7 years, my son is speaking. His voice rose. He could have destroyed every piece of crystal in this house, and it wouldn't matter. Catherine had the grace to look ashamed. Yes, sir, she said quietly. Mr. Whitmore turned back to Maria. You're not fired. You're not even going to be cleaning anymore. I want you to be Tommy's companion. Full-time. Whatever he needs. And your salary. He paused, thinking. Triple. Starting today. Maria's eyes widened. Sir, that is too much. I triple, Mr. Whitmore repeated firmly. And housing in the main house, not the staff quarters. Better accommodations. Whatever you need. Maria felt overwhelmed. Sir, I just do what felt right. You saved my son, Mr. Whitmore said, his voice thick with emotion. You gave him back to me. There's no amount of money that's worth that. But I can try. The weeks that followed were transformative. Tommy's speech didn't return all at once. Some days he spoke more than others. Some days he fell back into silence. But the wall had been breached, and gradually it crumbled further. Maria became his constant companion, not as a therapist, but as a friend. They would spend hours in the garden, with Tommy drawing while Maria tended to the flowers. She taught him Spanish words and he taught her English idioms. They cooked together in the kitchen, making simple Guatemalan dishes that reminded Maria of home. She told him stories about her daughters, and slowly Tommy began to tell her things too. About his mother, about the accident, about the years of silence. I could hear everything, he told her one day. All the doctors, all the therapists. I heard them talking about me like I was a problem to solve. But I wasn't ready. I couldn't make the words come out. Why could you talk to me? Maria asked gently. Because you didn't need me to, Tommy said simply. You were okay with me being quiet. So it felt safe to not be quiet anymore. Mr. Whitmore, for his part, had a longer journey. Years of emotional distance couldn't be erased overnight. He and Tommy were like strangers learning to know each other. But Mr. Whitmore tried. He cut back his work hours. He started having dinner with Tommy every night. He asked Maria to teach him how to connect with his son the way she had. Some conversations were awkward, some ended in painful silences, but they kept trying. One evening, about 2 months after Tommy had first spoken, Mr. Whitmore came home with news. The business deal, the one that had been jeopardized by the broken crystal, had fallen through. The company was indeed facing bankruptcy. Tommy, we need to talk, Mr. Whitmore said, sitting down at the dinner table. Things are going to change. We might have to sell the house, move somewhere smaller. I don't want you to be scared, but I'm not scared, Tommy interrupted. It's just a house. Mr. Whitmore looked at his son in surprise. You understand what I'm saying? We'll lose everything. Not everything, Tommy said. We still have each other. Maria, who had been serving the meal, felt tears prick her eyes at the boy's wisdom. Mr. Whitmore reached across the table and took his son's hand, something he had started doing in recent weeks, as if constantly reassuring himself that Tommy was real, was present, was his again. When did you get so smart? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I've always been smart, Tommy said with a slight smile, the first Maria had seen from him. I just couldn't tell anyone. The bankruptcy process was brutal. The media, which had largely ignored the Whitmore family for years, suddenly became intensely interested in their downfall. Reporters camped outside the estate. Headlines screamed about the fallen tech mogul. Business associates who had once fawned over Mr. Whitmore now avoided his calls. The Whitmore empire, built over decades, crumbled in months. They had to sell the Connecticut estate. The auction was painful, watching strangers bid on the furniture, the artwork, the pieces of a life that had once seemed unshakable. They moved to a modest house in a middle-class neighborhood, a 3-bedroom home that could fit inside their former living room. Mr. Whitmore, once a titan of industry, had to take a job as a consultant, making a fraction of his former salary. But something unexpected happened during this collapse. The family grew closer. Without the massive estate and the army of staff, there was nowhere to hide from each other. Mr. Whitmore cooked breakfast. Tommy helped with dishes. Maria, who insisted on staying with them despite having opportunities for better paying positions elsewhere, taught them both how to clean, how to budget, how to live simply. One night, about 6 months after they had moved, the three of them were sitting in the small living room. Tommy was drawing. Mr. Whitmore was reviewing job applications. Maria was mending a shirt, teaching herself to sew to save money. Tommy looked up from his sketchbook. "Dad?" he said. "Yes, son," Mr. Whitmore replied, immediately attentive. Every time Tommy spoke, it still felt like a gift. "Are you sad? About the money?" Mr. Whitmore considered the question carefully. "Honest. I was at first. I was angry, embarrassed. I felt like I had failed. And now?" Tommy asked. "Now?" Mr. Whitmore looked around the small, cramped living room, at his son sitting on the worn couch, at Maria humming softly as she worked. "Now I realize I already had failed. I had all the money in the world, and I was still losing what mattered most. I was losing you. And I didn't even notice until it was almost too late." He paused. "So no. I'm not sad about the money. I'm grateful for what losing it taught me." Tommy nodded, absorbing this. "Maria," he said, turning to her, "when can your daughters come visit?" Maria's hand stilled on the shirt she was mending. She looked up, surprised. "Oh, mi niño," she said softly. "That is very kind. But they are far away. In Guatemala. And the trip, it is expensive. I bring them someday, when I save enough." "How much?" Mr. Whitmore asked suddenly. Maria looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Whitmore, you don't need to." "How much?" he repeated. "For plane tickets? For both girls?" Maria hesitated, then named a figure. It was several $1,000s. Money they certainly didn't have lying around anymore. Mr. Whitmore was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he made a decision. "What if we all saved for it?" he suggested. "Tommy, you've been doing odd jobs for neighbors. I'm picking up freelance consulting projects. Maria, you're working part-time at the grocery store. What if we pooled everything we could spare and brought your daughters here for Christmas?" Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Whitmore, I cannot ask you to." "You're not asking," Mr. Whitmore interrupted. "We're offering. You gave me back my son. The least I can do is help reunite you with your daughters." Tommy nodded enthusiastically. "I want to meet them," he said. "You've told me so much about them. I feel like I already know them." And so began a new kind of effort, not driven by desperation or fear, but by love and gratitude. For the next 6 months, the household saved every penny they could. Mr. Whitmore took on extra projects. Tommy started a small business selling his artwork online, discovering that people would pay for his detailed drawings. Maria worked double shifts whenever possible. They budgeted ruthlessly, cutting every unnecessary expense. They stopped eating out entirely. They shopped at discount stores. They turned off lights religiously, monitored the thermostat, walked instead of driving whenever possible. Catherine, who had apologized profusely for her behavior and had helped them during the transition, heard about their goal and started a crowdfunding campaign online, sharing Tommy's story, how a housekeeper's kindness had saved a silent boy, and how that family was now trying to reunite her with her children. The response was overwhelming. Within weeks, they had not only enough for plane tickets but also for extended visas, allowing Maria's daughters to stay for several months. When Rosa and Carmen arrived at the airport 2 days before Christmas, Maria collapsed into their arms. Sobbing with joy, she had been separated from them for nearly 2 years, the longest stretch of her life. Tommy hung back shyly, but Rosa, who was indeed his age, walked right up to him. "You're Tommy," she said in accented English. "My mother talks about you in every phone call. You're like her American son." Tommy blushed. "She talks about you too," he said. "All the time." Mr. Whitmore watched the reunion with a full heart, thinking about how completely his life had changed. A year ago, he had been a billionaire with a silent son, living in emotional poverty despite material wealth. Now he was barely middle class, struggling to make ends meet, and he had never been happier. That Christmas was unlike any the Whitmore family had ever experienced. There were no expensive gifts, no catered dinner, no elaborate decorations. They had a small tree from a discount lot. Maria cooked a simple meal, a blend of American and Guatemalan traditions. They exchanged modest handmade gifts. Tommy gave Maria a portrait he had drawn of her daughters from photographs. She wept when she opened it. Rosa gave Tommy a bracelet she had woven herself. Carmen, who was younger, gave Mr. Whitmore a drawing she had made of their family, including him in it. "You're part of family now," she explained in halting English. Maria says family is not just blood. Family is people who love you. Mr. Whitmore had to excuse himself, overcome with emotion. This little girl, who had every reason to see him as just an employer, was including him in her family. After dinner, they sat around the tree, and Mr. Whitmore found himself telling stories about Tommy's mother, Elizabeth, for the first time since her death. He talked about how they had met, how she had laughed, what she had cared about. Tommy listened intently, hungry for these memories. He had been too young to fully form himself. "Maria, tell us about Guatemala," Rosa asked. "I want Tommy to understand where we come from." And so Maria shared stories of her homeland, painting pictures with her words of mountains and markets, of traditions and struggles. The evening stretched late into the night, filled with laughter and tears, with connection and understanding. It was, Mr. Whitmore realized, the first real Christmas he had experienced in 7 years. The months that followed brought new challenges and unexpected opportunities. Tommy returned to school, but this time to a public school in their new neighborhood. Mr. Whitmore had been anxious about this, worried that Tommy would struggle after years of isolation and silence. But Tommy surprised everyone. With Maria's encouragement and Rosa's friendship, he began to open up socially. He joined the art club. He made friends. He even gave a presentation in class about his experience with selective mutism, turning his years of silence into a teaching moment for his peers. His story spread through the school, and soon Tommy found himself in an unexpected role, helping other kids who struggled with anxiety, trauma, or communication difficulties. He understood what it felt like to be trapped inside yourself, and that empathy made him a powerful advocate. Mr. Whitmore, meanwhile, was slowly rebuilding. Not his empire, that was gone, but something more important, his purpose. One of his former business associates reached out with an idea. He had heard about Tommy's story and wanted to create a foundation focused on childhood trauma and alternative healing approaches. Would Mr. Whitmore consider leading it? The salary would be modest compared to his former income, but the work would be meaningful. Mr. Whitmore accepted immediately. The foundation, which they called the Elizabeth Whitmore Foundation in memory of Tommy's mother, started small. But Mr. Whitmore brought the same intensity to this work that he had once brought to building his business empire. The difference was that now he understood what truly mattered. One of the foundation's first initiatives was creating a program that trained caregivers, especially those from immigrant communities, in trauma-informed care approaches. They developed workshops based on Maria's instinctive methods: patience, consistency, unconditional presence, treating traumatized children as whole people rather than broken objects to be fixed. Maria became the program's heart and soul, sharing her story, training others, demonstrating that sometimes the most powerful healing doesn't come from credentials or degrees, but from genuine human connection. She was featured in newspapers, invited to speak at conferences. This woman, who had arrived in America barely able to speak English, who had taken a housekeeping job out of desperate necessity, was now influencing child psychology practices across the country. Rosa and Carmen, after their extended visit, returned to Guatemala, but with a plan. Mr. Whitmore and Maria worked together to ensure they could complete their education there while staying connected to their American family through regular video calls and annual visits. Tommy and Rosa, in particular, developed a close friendship that transcended distance. They would video chat for hours, sharing artwork, discussing books, teaching each other about their different worlds. 2 years after Tommy had first spoken, the foundation held its first major fundraising gala. It was a far cry from the lavish events the Whitmores used to host. This was held in a modest hotel ballroom, with local catering and volunteers handling most of the work. But the room was filled with people who genuinely cared about the cause. Therapists, teachers, social workers, families who had been helped by the foundation's programs. Mr. Whitmore stood at the podium, preparing to give the keynote speech. He looked out at the audience and spotted Maria sitting in the front row, dressed in a simple but elegant dress they had found at a thrift store. Tommy sat beside her, now 13 years old, tall and confident in a way that would have been unimaginable 3 years earlier. "Good evening," Mr. Whitmore began. "3 years ago, I was a very different man. I was wealthy by any conventional measure. I lived in a mansion. I ran a company worth billions. But I was bankrupt in the ways that actually matter. I had lost my wife. I was losing my son. And I was too blind to see it." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I hired the best specialists money could buy. I threw resources at the problem. I thought that if I just spent enough, tried hard enough, employed the right experts, I could fix what was broken. But I was approaching it all wrong. I was treating my son's silence as a problem to solve rather than as communication in itself. He was telling me, in the only way he could, that he didn't need to be fixed. He needed to be seen. He needed to be loved. He needed someone to sit with him in his pain without trying to change it or rush it or make it more comfortable. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. And then, when I had given up, when I thought there was no hope, a miracle walked through my door. Not in the form of a credentialed expert or an expensive treatment, but in the form of a housekeeper from Guatemala who barely spoke English and had no training in childhood psychology. Maria Santos did something that no one else had thought to do. She treated my son like a person. She shared her life with him. She asked nothing in return. She didn't need him to speak or respond or show progress. She simply showed up every day and was present. Fully, completely present. Mr. Whitmore's voice cracked slightly. And in doing so, she gave me back my son. She gave me back my life. She taught me what actually matters. Not wealth or status or success, but connection, love, being there for the people who need you. He looked directly at Maria, who had tears streaming down her face. The foundation we've built together is based on a simple principle that Maria taught me. Every child, regardless of their trauma, their background, their struggles, deserves to be seen as whole. Not as a collection of symptoms to treat or problems to solve, but as complete human beings worthy of patience, respect, and unconditional positive regard. We've helped over 500 families in the past 2 years. We've trained more than 2,000 caregivers in trauma-informed approaches. We've created support groups, resource centers, and educational programs. But more than anything, we're spreading a message. Healing happens in relationships, not in isolation, not in clinical settings alone, but in the everyday moments when one human being truly sees another. The audience erupted in applause. Mr. Whitmore stepped away from the podium and walked directly to Maria, pulling her into a hug. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." After the gala, as they were driving home in their modest sedan, Tommy spoke up from the back seat. "Dad," he said. "Yes, son? Do you ever miss it? The old life?" Mr. Whitmore glanced at Maria, who was sitting in the passenger seat, then back at the road. "Sometimes I miss certain comforts," he admitted. "Hot showers that don't run out of water. Not worrying about every expense. But miss the life? No." He was quiet for a moment. "That wasn't really living, Tommy. That was existing in isolation, surrounded by expensive things but disconnected from everything meaningful. This," he gestured around the car, at the three of them together, "this is living." Tommy nodded, satisfied with the answer. Maria reached over and squeezed Mr. Whitmore's hand. "You are good father," she said simply. "I'm trying to be," Mr. Whitmore replied. "You taught me how." "No," Maria shook her head. "I not teach you. You always know. You just forgot. Sometimes, when life is hard, we forget what is important, but is always there, inside. You just needed to remember." Mr. Whitmore felt tears prick his eyes, as they often did these days. He had cried more in the past 3 years than in his entire adult life before that. But these tears didn't feel like weakness. They felt like evidence that he was finally, truly alive. 3 years later, Tommy was 16 and thriving. He had become an accomplished artist, with several galleries showing interest in his work. But more importantly, he had found his calling in working with other young people who struggled with trauma and communication. He volunteered at the foundation regularly, using his art to help other kids express what they couldn't put into words. Rosa had graduated at the top of her class in Guatemala and had received a full scholarship to attend college in the United States, studying social work. She planned to return to Guatemala eventually to bring the foundation's methods to communities there. Carmen was following in her sister's footsteps, excelling in school and dreaming of becoming a teacher like her mother had been. Maria, now in her late 40s, had become the foundation's director of community outreach. She had improved her English significantly, though she still spoke with a thick accent that she no longer felt self-conscious about. She traveled around the country, sharing Tommy's story and her own, training caregivers, advocating for immigrant workers to be recognized for the crucial care work they provided. Mr. Whitmore had found peace in his new life. He would never be wealthy again, not in monetary terms. But he had learned that wealth is measured in different currencies, in relationships, in purpose, in the ability to sleep soundly at night, knowing you've made a positive difference. One evening, the extended family gathered for dinner. Mr. Whitmore, Tommy, Maria, Rosa, who was home for summer break, and Carmen, who was visiting again. They were celebrating Tommy's acceptance to art school with a full scholarship. As they sat around the table in their small dining room, passing dishes and sharing stories, Mr. Whitmore looked around and felt a sense of completeness he had never experienced in the mansion. This, he thought, this is everything. After dinner, Tommy showed them his latest project, a series of drawings documenting his journey from silence to voice. The first image was dark and claustrophobic, showing a small figure trapped inside concentric circles. The final image was vibrant and open, showing the same figure surrounded by others, connected by threads of light. In the middle of the series was a portrait of Maria, simple but powerful. Underneath, Tommy had written, "She didn't teach me to speak. She taught me that I was worth hearing." Maria wept when she saw it. "That one," she said, pointing to the portrait. "That one. You give to me?" "It's already yours," Tommy said, smiling. "I made it for you. Everything I am now, I owe to you." Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat, overcome with emotion as he so often was these days. "Maria," he said, "I've been thinking about something for a while and I want to ask you properly." Maria looked at him curiously. "You've been part of our family for 6 years now," he continued. "You've been more than an employee, more than a friend. You've been Tommy's savior, my teacher, our family's anchor." He paused. "I want to make it official. I want to adopt you as Tommy's legal second parent. If you'll accept." Maria's hand flew to her mouth. "Mr. Whitmore, I know it's unconventional," he said quickly. "But we're not a conventional family. And I want you to have the legal rights and recognition you deserve. I want Tommy to have the security of knowing that you're not just in his life temporarily, but permanently." Maria looked at Tommy, who was nodding enthusiastically. "Please, Maria," Tommy said. "You're already my mom in every way that matters. This just makes it official." Maria dissolved into tears, unable to speak. Finally, she managed to nod. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." The legal adoption process took several months, but on a sunny Tuesday in March, Maria Santos officially became Maria Santos Whitmore, Tommy's legal guardian alongside his father. The judge who presided over the case commented that in his 20 years on the bench, he had never seen a more clear case of a family bond that simply needed legal recognition to match the emotional reality. After the ceremony, as they were leaving the courthouse, a reporter who had been following the foundation's work approached them. "Mr. Whitmore," she called out, "can I ask you a question?" Mr. Whitmore hesitated, then nodded. "What would you say to people who are facing similar situations?" she asked. "Parents with traumatized children who aren't responding to traditional treatment. Families torn apart by loss or crisis?" Mr. Whitmore thought carefully before responding. "I would say this. You can't always fix what's broken. Sometimes things don't need to be fixed. They need to be witnessed. They need to be held with compassion. They need time and space and unconditional presence." He glanced at Maria, who stood beside him. "I would tell them to look beyond credentials and expertise. Sometimes the person who can help you most is the one who simply shows up with an open heart. I would tell them that healing isn't linear. There will be setbacks and silence and days when you think nothing is working. But presence matters. Consistency matters. Love matters. Even when you can't see the results." The reporter scribbled notes. "And what would you say to Maria? What has she taught you?" "Everything," Mr. Whitmore said simply. "She taught me that true wealth is measured in relationships. That courage sometimes looks like showing up quietly, day after day, without expectation of recognition or reward. That transformation happens not in grand gestures, but in small, consistent acts of kindness. She taught me how to be a father again, how to be human again." Maria, embarrassed by the praise, tried to deflect. "I just do what any mother would do," she said. "I see child who need love, and I give love. Is simple. But it's not simple," the reporter said gently. "Most people would have followed instructions, stayed in their lane, not risked their job for a child that wasn't theirs." Maria shrugged. "When you see someone drowning, you don't ask if it's your job to save them. You just save them." Tommy, who had been quiet during the exchange, spoke up. "Can I say something?" he asked. "Of course," the reporter said, turning to him. "Everyone sees Maria as the hero of this story," Tommy said. "And she is. But I want people to understand something else too. My dad, he made mistakes. He was so lost in his grief that he couldn't see me drowning. But when I finally spoke, when Maria gave me back my voice, he didn't waste a second. He changed everything. He gave up his pride, his wealth, his entire identity to rebuild our relationship. That takes courage too." He looked at his father. A lot of parents would have just been relieved that the problem was solved and gone back to their old patterns. But Dad didn't do that. He became a completely different person. He learned to listen, to be present, to put me first. So yeah, Maria saved me. But Dad saved himself. And that matters too. Mr. Whitmore wrapped his arm around Tommy's shoulders, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The reporter smiled. "That's beautiful," she said. "Thank you all for sharing your story." As they walked away from the courthouse, now legally recognized as a family in every sense, Maria turned to Mr. Whitmore. "You know what is funny?" she said. "What?" She smiled. 6 years ago, I come to this country with nothing. I am desperate, scared, alone. I think I come here to make money for my daughters. But really, I come here to find family, to find purpose, to find home. God works in mysterious ways, no? Mr. Whitmore squeezed her hand. The most mysterious ways, he agreed. Tommy walked between them, feeling completely secure for the first time since his mother had died. He thought about the journey he had been on, from silence to voice, from isolation to connection, from brokenness to wholeness. It hadn't been quick. It hadn't been easy. But it had been real. That evening, the family gathered in their small living room. Mr. Whitmore had a surprise. He had been working on something in secret for months. He pulled out a large portfolio and opened it carefully. Inside were dozens of architectural drawings. Plans for a building. "What is this?" Maria asked, confused. Mr. Whitmore smiled. "The foundation has been successful enough that we can finally afford a permanent location," he explained. "Not just offices, but a full center. Therapy rooms, art studios, spaces for support groups, training facilities, everything under one roof." He pointed to different sections of the plans. "And here, this wing, I've designed it specifically based on your methods, Maria. Open spaces, natural light, places where caregivers and children can simply be together without the clinical feel of traditional therapy settings." Maria stared at the drawings, overwhelmed. "Is real?" she asked. "It's real," Mr. Whitmore confirmed. "We break ground in 3 months. And look at this." He pointed to the entrance of the building in the rendering. Above the main doors was a name. The Maria Santos Whitmore Center for Healing and Hope. "I can't take credit," Mr. Whitmore said. "But I want people to know whose wisdom this is built on." Tommy was grinning. "And Dad, show them the other part." Mr. Whitmore flipped to another page. "This is the art therapy wing," he said. "We're creating a program where kids can use visual expression as their primary form of communication. No pressure to talk, just space to create." Tommy has agreed to be one of the primary instructors. "At 16?" Maria asked, surprised. "He's lived it," Mr. Whitmore said simply. "That makes him more qualified than most adults." The center opened 8 months later. The grand opening was attended by hundreds of people. Families the foundation had helped, donors, community leaders, and media. But the most important moment came when a young girl, maybe 8 years old, was brought in by her foster parents. She hadn't spoken since being removed from an abusive home 6 months earlier. Tommy noticed her standing in the corner during the opening reception, looking overwhelmed by all the people. He approached her slowly, not speaking, just offering a gentle smile. Then he handed her a sketchbook and a set of colored pencils. "You don't have to talk," he said quietly. "Sometimes pictures say everything we need to say." The girl looked at the sketchbook, then at Tommy. After a long moment, she took it. Tommy sat down on the floor nearby, pulling out his own sketchbook. He began to draw, not paying direct attention to the girl, just creating space for her to feel safe. After about 10 minutes, the girl sat down a few feet away and opened her sketchbook. She began to draw. Maria watched this interaction from across the room, tears streaming down her face. She felt Mr. Whitmore come up beside her. "He's going to help so many kids," Mr. Whitmore said softly, "because he remembers what it felt like." They stood there together, watching Tommy and the little girl drawing in comfortable silence, and Maria thought about the mysterious journey that had brought her here. She had come to America looking for work. She had found a calling. She had expected to be a housekeeper. She had become a mother, a healer, a teacher. She had thought she was coming to help others. But in the process, she had been transformed too. That night after the opening reception, the family returned to their home. They were exhausted but happy. As they sat in the living room, winding down from the exciting day, Tommy said something that perfectly captured everything they had been through. "You know what I've been thinking about?" he said. "What?" his father asked. "That moment when I first spoke. When Maria was on the floor surrounded by broken glass, everyone sees that as the miracle moment. But it wasn't really. The miracle was all the mornings before that. All the times Maria came to my room and talked to me when I didn't respond. All the times she showed up without needing anything back. That was the real miracle. The speaking was just the result. Maria smiled. The speaking was always there, mijijo, she said gently. I just help you find it. But it was there. You just buried, not broken. Big difference. That's what I try to tell the parents who come to the center now, Mr. Whitmore added. Their kids aren't broken. They're buried under trauma, under fear, under pain. But the wholeness is still there. We just have to help them excavate it, not fix it, find it. Tommy nodded. And sometimes, he said, the person best equipped to help isn't the one with the most degrees or training. It's the one with the most heart. The three of them sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each reflecting on the improbable journey that had brought them together and transformed them all. Finally, Maria spoke. You know, when I was little girl in Guatemala, my abuela used to tell me something. She say, Maria, God gives us opportunities to be angels for other people. Most times, we too busy or too scared to take them. But when you see opportunity to help someone, even in small way, you take it. Because maybe you are the angel they've been praying for. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. When I meet Tommy, I not think I am angel. I just think I am housekeeper who lonely boy needs friend. But maybe abuela was right. Maybe we all are angels for each other when we pay attention. Mr. Whitmore reached over and took her hand. If you're an angel, he said, you're the kind that arrives in the most unexpected form. The kind that people almost miss because they're looking for something more impressive. But those are the best kind. The ones that show up in ordinary clothing and do extraordinary things through simple presence. Tommy pulled out his sketchbook, suddenly inspired. He began drawing quickly, his pencil moving across the page with confident strokes. After about 15 minutes, he held it up. It was a drawing of Maria, but with subtle, almost invisible wings. Not the dramatic feathered wings of traditional angel imagery, but something more like a shimmer of light around her shoulders. Barely there. Easy to miss, but unmistakably present. Underneath, he had written, angels don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just show up and do the dishes. Maria laughed and cried at the same time, pulling Tommy into a tight hug. That night, as Maria lay in bed in her room in the house she now officially shared as family, she thought about the impossible arc of her life. She had left Guatemala in desperation. She had arrived in America scared and alone. She had taken a job cleaning houses because it was all she could find. And somehow, through a series of small choices, through showing up each day with an open heart, through treating a silent boy like he mattered, she had found her purpose. She had found her family. She had found home. In the room next door, Tommy lay in his bed, thinking about similar things. He thought about the 7 years he had spent in silence. Years that had felt like prison. But now, looking back, he could see them differently. Those years had taught him empathy. They had taught him what it feels like to be invisible, to be given up on, to be seen as broken. And that understanding would allow him to help countless other kids who felt the same way. His silence hadn't been wasted. It had been preparation. Down the hall, Mr. Whitmore sat in his small home office, looking at financial statements for the foundation. They were doing well, growing steadily, helping more families each month. But he wasn't looking at the numbers with the hungry ambition he once would have felt. He was looking at them with gratitude. This work mattered in a way his old business never had. Yes, he had been successful before. He had been rich and powerful and respected. But he had been empty. Now he was none of those things by conventional standards. But he was full of purpose, full of connection, full of love. He thought about the moment 6 years earlier when he had hit rock bottom. When his business was failing, his son was lost to him, and he had felt like his entire life was falling apart. At the time, it had felt like the end. Now he understood it had been the beginning. The breaking down of everything false, everything hollow, everything that didn't actually matter. Making space for what did. The next morning, the family had breakfast together before starting their day. It was a simple meal, eggs, toast, fruit. Nothing fancy. But they ate together, talking about their plans, sharing small moments, being present with each other. Before they left the table, Maria said something that had become a family ritual. She held out her hands, and Mr. Whitmore and Tommy each took one, forming a small circle. Okay, Maria said. What we grateful for today? Tommy spoke first. I'm grateful for art, he said. For having a way to express what words can't capture. And I'm grateful for this family that taught me I was worth hearing even when I couldn't speak. Mr. Whitmore went next. I'm grateful for second chances, he said. For the opportunity to rebuild my life on a foundation that actually matters. For learning that success isn't about what you achieve, but about who you become and who you help along the way. Maria smiled. I am grateful for journey, she said. For trusting God even when I scared. For seeing lonely boy and choosing to befriend. For finding family in place I never expect. For learning that home is not place. Home is people who love you. They squeezed hands, a moment of connection before the busy day began. Friends, this story teaches us something that our world often forgets. We live in a society that worships credentials, expertise, and professional solutions. When something is wrong, we throw money at it. We hire experts. We look for quick fixes and guaranteed results. But the most profound healing often comes from the simplest source. One human being truly seeing another. Maria didn't have a degree in psychology. She didn't have training in childhood trauma. She didn't have certifications or credentials or a professional methodology. What she had was an open heart. What she had was the willingness to show up day after day without needing results or recognition or reward. What she had was the radical belief that Tommy was not a problem to be solved, but a person to be loved. And that made all the difference. This story also reminds us that our darkest moments often precede our greatest transformations. When Thomas Whitmore lost his business, when his empire crumbled, when he had to face the failure of everything he had built, it felt like the end. But it was actually the clearing away of everything false, making space for something real. Sometimes life doesn't give us what we want. It strips away what we thought we needed to show us what actually matters. The Whitmore family lost their mansion. They lost their wealth. They lost their status and security. But they found each other. They found purpose. They found a way to turn their pain into something that helps others. And in the end, that is worth infinitely more than any mansion or bank account. Tommy's 7 years of silence weren't wasted years. They were preparation. They taught him empathy, resilience, and understanding that would later allow him to help countless other children. Your struggles are not punishments. They are often your training for your purpose. The very thing you survive qualifies you to help others survive it too. And perhaps most importantly, this story teaches us to pay attention to the opportunities for kindness that present themselves in our daily lives. Maria could have just left the breakfast tray outside Tommy's door like everyone else did. She could have followed the rules, stayed in her lane, protected her job. But she didn't. She took a chance on connection. She trusted her instinct that this lonely boy needed a friend, not another caregiver treating him like a problem. How many opportunities for profound impact do we miss because we're too busy, too scared, too focused on following the rules? How many lives could we change if we just showed up with presence and compassion? You don't need credentials to make a difference. You don't need wealth or status or special training. You just need to see people, really see them, treat them like they matter, show up consistently, ask nothing in return. The Whitmores found their miracle not in an expensive treatment or a prestigious hospital. They found it in a housekeeper who barely spoke English, but who spoke the universal language of love. So I ask you, who in your life is sitting in silence, waiting for someone to simply see them? Not to fix them, not to solve their problems, not to give them advice, just to be present, to show up, to treat them like they're worth the time and effort even when they can't give anything back. Maybe it's your own child, buried under academic pressure or social anxiety or trauma you don't fully understand. Maybe it's a coworker who eats lunch alone every day. Maybe it's an elderly neighbor who rarely gets visitors. Maybe it's a student who sits in the back of the class, invisible and struggling. Whoever it is, you have the opportunity to be there, Maria. Not because you have special training or expertise, but because you have a heart that's willing to show up. This family's story proves that the most extraordinary changes often come from the most ordinary actions. Showing up, being consistent, offering presence without pressure, believing in someone when they've stopped believing in themselves. That's not complicated, but it is powerful. The question that remains is this: what are you going to do with the opportunities for kindness that present themselves in your life? Will you take them? Will you risk being the person who shows up even when there's no guarantee of results? Will you trust that presence matters even when you can't see immediate impact? Because somewhere, right now, someone is sitting in their own version of silence, waiting, hoping, needing someone to see them, to believe in them. To show up without needing them to perform or respond or be anything other than exactly who they are in this moment. Maybe you're that someone for them. Maybe your simple act of consistent kindness will be the thing that changes everything. Not today, not next week, but someday, when they're ready, when they've absorbed enough love to believe they're worthy of being heard, they'll speak. And when they do, it will be because you showed up. Not once, not with grand gestures, but daily, quietly, faithfully. Thomas Whitmore was a billionaire who had everything except what mattered most. Maria Santos was a housekeeper with nothing except a heart willing to love. In the end, she was the wealthier person, and she made them all rich. Your wealth is not measured by your bank account. It's measured by the lives you touch, the people you see, the presence you offer, the love you give without expecting return. That is the currency that actually matters. That is the investment that pays eternal dividends. So show up, be present, believe in people. Even when, especially when, everyone else has given up. You might just be the miracle someone has been waiting for. And in being their miracle, you might discover that they've been yours all along.